I have been involved in security for a long time, longer than it was even called cybersecurity. I think third-party risk management is the hardest problem I've ever seen.
Dashboards have value, absolutely, but what's the story those dashboards are going to tell? And is that the story that your leadership, is that the story they want?
So bad guys, they're going to take the easiest pathway. Yeah. Who knew the bad guys were lazy just like everybody else?
Yeah, really.
We have these 100 vendors. It's a one-man team that you are going to reach out to them, get the answers. So what am I managing then?
Greetings and salutations, one and all. Welcome to today's episode of Third Party. You know, we've been talking about things you should do. Today, we're going to talk about a bunch of things you shouldn't do. Today's episode is about top X things you're doing that's ruining your third-party risk management program. So,
what are you? Are you a developer? What is X things? You need to put a number or that top X things.
You still got to put a number? All right. Five is the number.
Yeah, we're just going to be varying here, right?
Five. God damn it, donut. All right, so 5 things, and hopefully we won't run out of time. All right, so, you know, I have been involved in security for a long time, longer than it was even called cybersecurity. I was a pen tester before it was even called pen testing. I was a bad pen tester, but I attempted. I think third-party risk management is the hardest problem I've ever seen. What do you think about that?
In cybersecurity, maybe. There's other problems that came to mind that have nothing to do with this podcast.
Perpetual motion machines.
Yeah.
All right, let's narrow the focus a little bit.
Focus today. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think the problem stems from it was born out of compliance. And, you know, not a risk perspective. They call it a risk perspective, but it strictly, and nothing against the banks, but it kind of, that's where it came from. You know, when I was working at the Commonwealth as a CISO, third parties were,
hey, Bob, I just got a text. Apparently, all the banks just shut down your accounts.
Well, that's nice. But yeah, we didn't worry about third parties. It was all contractual. The risk just wasn't there. And it came about when the regulators told the banks that they have to focus on that. And because it came from the regulators, I think it came more as a belief that compliance is security. And that's how it got started. And that's really pervaded till today. And I think that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, it all started as a checklist, right? When it's a checklist, it's not a very difficult problem, maybe, because you are just trying to complete a checklist. I mean, it's a difficult problem, but nowadays it moved more on the rapid risk and response, right? When there's a high-profile incident, a problem that every cybersecurity professional should look into. Now, you have to look into that problem, not just for your own organization, but for your whole third-party ecosystem. And it's a very difficult problem. There's a scalability issue, complexity issue. You need to narrow it down. Maybe you just have enough resources to focus on the critical suppliers and nothing more. But the attack may come from any suppliers at some point.
Right. All right. So let's go through the top 5, because I got to pick 5. So first one, annual assessments aging out the moment they are completed. So I'll share a real quick story and then I'll get your thoughts on this. So I did a certification in third-party risk management back a couple of years ago. And during the session, one of the attendees asked this question. We assess our vendors every 3 years. Is that okay? I had to mute myself and bite my tongue because I really wanted to say, no, that is not okay. But that's what we've sort of been relegated to, right? We send out questionnaires. We've talked about questionnaires and their sort of lack of real value. But that's what people have done. And they literally build risk management decisions on data that could be a year, 2, 3 years old. So what are your thoughts on that? Or not thoughts, what is your guidance on that? How do we move away from that?
Well, I mean, questionnaires and annual assessments, they have a place. I will give you that. From a compliance perspective, maybe from a regulatory perspective, they have their own place to keep the records in place. But that doesn't mean that you are secure. You cannot be secure by looking at your vendors once in a year. I know there are resource problems, there are, problems short of staff and everything. But now there are tools that can help you to do continuous monitoring. And that's the key. You need to do a continuous monitoring because during the assessment, the checklist is completed. The risk is acceptable. You can work with that vendor. But there is, one campaign by the threat actors targeting a specific vulnerability or a specific RDP port, or nowadays they are, targeting Salesforce clients. They are using an API credentials through another third party. So it's actually a fourth party attack. So you cannot see those things with annual assessments. That's impossible to see. Annual assessments is that, okay, you have a cybersecurity program, you do these things and that things. I think I can trust you, but I don't even trust myself when it comes to that. How you can trust?
I don't trust you either, Ferhat.
Thank you.
Just saying.
You shouldn't. So that's why it doesn't work.
That's all good. That is how we fix things. But I think we're trying to figure out why we got here, and it's really kind of simple. We never did this before because we didn't have to, and then the regulators said you have to assess your third parties, and they didn't say how to assess the third parties. They say you have to assess. So what's the way we do that? Well, we have a framework.
But we ask them a bunch of questions.
Yeah, let's ask questions about the framework, and then let's make sure we're all on the same page. And that made it easy, and that was great because you were meeting compliance requirements. That thought of being secure, the issues of third party as a risk, I don't think had really come to people's minds. It was really all about compliance, and then along comes New York State DFS. That's a regulation that if your company does any kind of financial transactions with any residents in New York State, that you're subject to those regulations. And in that regulation, they said that you have to continuously monitor, or if you can't, do an annual pen test. All right. So, okay, this is a government regulation that goes from doing something continuously to something once a year. So they couldn't even get it right. But the fact that they're requiring continuous monitoring created a whole new industry. And same thing happened. You just do continuous monitoring. Doesn't mean it has to be good. Doesn't mean it has to be effective. Doesn't mean it has to reduce risk in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
It means you have to do continuous monitoring as a checklist.
Right. And they don't define continuous. They don't define monitoring. And that's, I think what I would sort of posit is that when we had nothing, this was better than nothing. We now have better options. And I think people are still kind of mired in, well, we've always done it this way. All right. So that is number one. We need to move away from point in time, periodic snapshots, moving closer to continuous. We never get there, but we need to move closer to where we're getting.
We do, but we don't need to move away from point in time. We need to understand the value because point in time assessments do provide some value. They create baselines. They create starting points that you can now monitor. You have a place to start with the continuous monitoring. And typically,
I'd like to disagree with you, but I can't.
Yeah. Thank you. But, typically continuous monitoring doesn't go quite as in depth as some of the assessments. So they do have value. And, it's funny you were saying about the 1 to 2 or 3 years. I will defend those people simply because that's what their policy says.
Right.
That was the effort we can't assess everybody once a year. There's too many vendors. So we have to rank them. We have to do a risk-based assessment. So let's do it qualitatively. Okay, these vendors are high risk.
I don't know. Joe says that vendor is really, really important. We better assess them.
So that gets once a year. Yeah. These, not so much. Those are the ones that we say we'll do every 3 years. And I don't know if I've ever met anybody that actually does that third year assessment. They never get around to it because they're too busy with the end.
And people change, policy changes, the relationships change. Sometimes people feel like, what's the point of assessing when we actually have no power to do anything about it, right? Especially if these things are contractual. Okay, so the second issue is because we're so sort of focused on, we talked about report cards and we talked about dashboards in previous episodes, they create blind spots because that's all that they're being presented with. And we've talked a lot on the show about context. I think that's actually come up in every single episode. And I think it's really good that it does that because it's so important. But we're seeing these blind spots where people are not getting this whole picture, right? They're seeing these kind of little pieces, all of which probably have value. But how do we get people to think about, yes, the dashboards are good to get us to ask questions, to engage, to have better conversations with stakeholders, with customers, with vendors? How do we shift?
Well, I think the problem is that they are usually static dashboards, right? You set it and then you just present the same thing over and over again, which has the consistency. But if it is a copy and paste framework dashboards, then it doesn't work because the environment changed. Your dashboards needs to change with that. You need to put context. We discussed it in previous episodes, right? You need to put context on the dashboards. And I strongly believe that the practitioner should share their experience. For instance, among our customers, they want to share the dashboards they create with other customers so that they can see what is working, what is not working, and they can change and adapt those dashboards. The other thing is that dashboard is at the end is summarization of your findings, right? If it requires, you need to go into details to avoid those blind spots. You cannot just trust the dashboard. You need to investigate and find the blind spots if it is not there.
Dashboards are interesting. I think in many cases, dashboards are an attempt for the practitioners to give leadership something that they think they may need. And they never think about, oh, well, we have to do dashboards. Well, what's going to look good? What's going to make us look good? Those types of things. And they forget that, dashboards have value, absolutely. But what's the story those dashboards are going to tell? And is that the story that your leadership or whoever the consumer of the dashboard is that the story they want or they need? Is it effective? Does it give them enough information to make useful decisions about that data that's being presented? And I think that's kind of where we miss the boat, because then you have to do what Ferhat talked about. They may change. They can't be static. It might be something different. And as we're well aware, most people don't like something different. It's like, we presented these last month and leadership nodded and they smiled and, we must be doing well.
Right. Except in their head, what they're saying is, when is this guy going to go?
Yeah.
But, it's funny you mentioned that, because we literally had this conversation over breakfast this morning, talking about different mechanisms for monitoring our sleep. Right. And I showed you the dashboard for my app, and I won't name any names. And you showed me yours, and I'm like, your app has a much cooler dashboard than mine. But neither one of them really, I sleep terribly. I know that. But it's not telling me how to fix that.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, mine tells you how to fix it. Yeah.
All right, well,
I have a better dashboard.
Well, yes, you do. Yes, you do. All right, great. So then the third one is, and this is a conversation that's been going on for years, focusing on compliance at the expense of real security. I still think we see too much, too many, too often, the belief that compliance and security are the same thing. And we need to move away from that. Are you seeing any improvement? No. And how do we do that in organizations where compliance is the first thing?
Well, people in our industry, they like to say compliance isn't security. Well, that's obvious. I mean, everybody knows that. But there's a risk that we don't think about, and that's the risk of not being compliant. So compliance is, this all started in the financial industry, regulators, where non-compliance had impact to the bank. If you weren't compliant, it could be detrimental to the business. So therefore, not compliance per se, but compliance risk. The resolution of compliance risk became more important than understanding, compliance is a great baseline, but you're right. It's just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're secure. For years, you could say that everybody that was PCI compliant that had a breach, they were all PCI compliant when they had the breach. Right. It's just how it worked. So it's it's more complex than just saying that compliance isn't security. It's trying to solve both of those problems, because you still, especially in a regulated industry, you have to face compliance because it's a risk. So getting the combination of those two and having the ability to be compliant and have that additional level of whatever it is you have that can address real security. That's the challenge.
I don't think it should be an either-or problem, right? Of course, we shouldn't over-focus on compliance in the expense of security, but we need to understand that there is an alignment in compliance and security, but the overlap is not as much as we think. And we have to focus on both to understand that. There are some regulatory bodies, they try to understand and make it, more about cybersecurity and the real practices, but they also have to think about all these regulations around privacy, so they're adding materials around that. So we need to understand that as well. And the good thing about the compliance part, even though we shouldn't over-focus on compliance, is they help you to keep audit trails, right? When there's an incident on a third party, some regulations, especially the financial regulations in Canada right now, I think it is OSFP or OSFI 10 and 13, they ask you if there is a breach on your third party, what did you have about that third party before the breach? Do you have any monitoring capabilities? What do those monitoring capabilities tell you before the breach? What are the audit trails that you have? So those are good things, good evidences to keep in your packet. So there are good things about the compliance, and as he said, it's worse to be non-compliant. So compliance is the baseline. You need to start there, but that doesn't mean that you are secure. You need to build on top of that and provide the real practices.
I've always been a big believer that if you start with security and risk, compliance is an outcome of that. And you may need to tweak the things you're doing. But I think when you start with compliance, you end up with an abstraction, and the risk is then being found non-compliant. And I think we then are disconnected from the underlying risk, right? Risk is about protecting data. It's about maintaining contractual things. And I think sometimes we put compliance controls in so that we can check a box, but don't actually get any real risk treatment or mitigation out of that. So,
yeah, it's you look at the regulated industries, and it's getting better. Like you said, the regulators are they may not be state of the art, but they've progressed significantly from where it was.
Well, hopefully they're learning lessons from feedback they're getting from organizations.
But still, it's the regulatory industry, and it's slow. And, if you're in that industry and so your third party gets breached, and one of the first things that they're going to ask you is, let's see, were you compliant? And if you were compliant and the third party got breached, well, then it's not so bad. But if you're focusing on third party security and not compliance, and the third party gets breached, it's, oh, you're not compliant. You get really slammed for compliance. Right. And it's that preservation that I think a lot of times drives these. They may be unconscious decisions because nobody wants to be unsecure. Nobody wants to fail. But in the back of your mind,
I met a guy one time. He said, "I want to fail." he was good at it too.
He was, but seriously, that fear of what's going to happen of a regulator or whatever industry you're in, because all of the companies that got breached for PCI were PCI compliant. They only had breach recovery costs. They didn't have compliance issues.
Right.
Yeah. And we need to acknowledge that you cannot update a compliance framework every other month, right? At best, you can do that annually because you are enforcing that framework to people. But nowadays with AI, maybe it might be possible. We might have dynamic frameworks that can be enforceable if there are AI solutions on the regulated industry as well.
Yeah, but you're going to have to change the, because I think that's a brilliant idea, but you're going to have to change the enforcement capability. Those folks who are enforcing it, last month it said this, but this month it said that, and so it gets complicated.
Right, because the auditors are coming in with a list that they're handed by their management.
Yeah.
Well,
So
my point is that maybe you may not need a human auditor at that point. The AI can audit some of the things. And
you
it
heard it
can-
here. Ferhat called it no more human auditors.
That's not what the AI is.
Well, this is to all of my auditor friends. I don't know him.
I mean, you still need human in the loop, but you don't need to physically send or, virtually send someone to every company to audit something. There can be still human supervising all the audits that has been done in that month, but now the AIs can do some of the other thing after an approval from
AI assistance
AI
during the auditors.
Yeah.
Right.
There, you guys are keeping your jobs.
Right. Partnership. All right. Number 4, the set it and forget it approach, right? Let's spin this thing up. We'll create a bunch of policies. We're going to send them out. They're going to do their thing. We're good, right?
Of course you are.
He's joking. So how do we get people to sort of move? I mean, you hit on it earlier, Ferhat. Part of it's a human capital limitation, right? We just don't have enough people to turn loose on these programs. We don't have enough people that are going, hey, we have 80% exceptions. Maybe this policy is bad, right? Or the policy no longer deals with new technology like AI or whatever comes next. So how do we get people to move away from that set it and forget it sort of mentality, right? So, we talked about continuous, right? In this case, it's a matter of continuous improvement. How do we build feedback loops that are not a year long, right? Hey, we failed. Let's fail fast. Let's get back to it. Let's figure it out. How do we do that?
I think the industry will force people to get away from a traditional setting and forgetting kind of things because
Okay, the industry. What industry? You talking about security? Or you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the AI industry and all the technological improvements that we are seeing nowadays. They are very fast, right? They are forcing people to see these new attack vectors, these new risks out there. So they cannot just use the same policy they set a year ago or 2 years ago. Right? They have to change those policies or their processes. However, I'm coming back to AI. I'm not a 100% pro AI guy, by the way, but I keep telling that you throw an AI and you'll solve it. But here, again, there's an opportunity. Then an AI assistant, an AI agent or an agenting AI structure can help you to dynamically change some of the policies on the way or the processes on the way based on the conditions that you set. So it's still a set it, forget it, but there is an assistant will help you to change or fine tune the items.
So we're moving now more toward like agentic AI rather than Gen AI in that scenario,
Yes,
right?
Exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But you guys are forgetting about the reality on the ground.
Well, we don't have to talk about reality. We're sitting here on a set. There's no reality here.
Unless you've actually been in this world of policies, policy management, policy updating, exceptions, exception management, it's easy to pontificate about these things have to change. And from coming from that world, you have absolutely no idea how I would love for that to change. This is a bigger problem than just information security. It's a board level problem that the folks that work on policies, that work on exceptions, they are typically in a part of the organization that is in operations, that is a cost, not as affecting the bottom line. And there's ways to get to talk about that. We know that, but that's the challenge. And so if you're looking at being compliant with certain frameworks, they all have different aspects around how policies talk about things. For ISO, so you might have a small subset of policies that are specific to ISO. If you want to get an ISO certification, you're going through SOC 2, you have to have another set. If you're going through FedRAMP, now you have to have another iceberg full of policies. So you have all of these policies that have all their requirements about annual updates. So it's not set it and forget it. There's very few places. If you look at since day one, with Black Kite AI, when you're analyzing policies, what does it look at? the age of the policy, because everybody knows that policy should be updated, reviewed, and then spread out to the organization so everybody can read them and accept them. So this is a nightmare of effort around policy management. And one of the things,
and nobody wants to do it because it's not fun or sexy.
No, it isn't.
Right?
It's boring, and a lot of times, a lot of things in the policies don't change because they don't need to. It'd be great. Oh, well, let's just send out the changes. Well, that's not what the compliance requirements are. They have to accept the whole policy. I mean, it's so challenging to do that, and those folks live in that world. They have to do it, because if you're not compliant,
right,
then you have compliance risk.
Earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time reviewing people's policy and process documents, and I ran into a lot of stuff. Like I remember talking to one state agency one time. They had one 300-page policy, and I said, "That's terrible." And they said, "We know, but every policy needs to go through an entire review process. If we have to review 56-page policies, I think my math is right, that will take significantly longer than one 300-page policy." Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that was every time they needed to make one change, the whole 300 pages had to go through, and the attorneys would get a hold of it, and they would look at something that they didn't find the time before. Mm-hmm. So it's a hard thing. And I think you hit on something really interesting, Ferhat, which is this an AI solvable problem?
It sounds like
to tweak the policy. I just think we need more transparency in how that's being done.
Yeah. But apart from the compliance side, these policy and exception management, I was more on the real third-party risk management for the sake of security, not for the sake of compliance. There we have more opportunities on set it and forget it by using an agentic AI structure.
Right.
Hear me out, right? So you have tens of thousands of vendors that you have to continuously monitor, but you can employ AI agents to, based on certain criteria that you set, hey, if the risk is above this or the score is below this, you will take this action, that action. Or if there's an incident, you will, check and figure out which vendors are at risk. And based on the criticality level of the vendors, you will send an assessment, or you will send these findings, or whatever you have. We have a great opportunity over there. And that's the new way of set it and forget it structure that I was talking about.
Right. So you're kind of winding up a bunch of little different sets of processes with their self-contained sort of functionality. So I like that, but we're moving away from set it and forget it programmatically to set it and forget it from a tactical perspective, which I think makes a lot more sense. And I think that actually transitions great to the final one, which is about culture, right? You can create all the policy you want, you can put all the tools in place, but if the culture is not aligned with managing risk, it's never going to be fixed. And a great example would be a problem that we've actually solved with the Black Kite Bridge, which is I'm a consumer. I notice there's a security problem in one of my vendors. I don't know how to get to those people. So what do? I raise it to the business executive on my side. What do? They talk to the account executive on the other side, who may or may not then go talk to their security team. So we end up with this back and forth game of telephone, and account executive maybe doesn't share the information because they don't want to lose the business. Mm-hmm. That's a culture problem that is never going to be solved by tools. So how do we shift the culture, right? Because the one thing I learned a long time ago, you can't change a culture by saying we're going to change the culture, right? You got to do it. You got to show it, tone from the top. So how do we get those business executives who may be impacted by decisions that are being made by third-party risk, sometimes to their detriment? How do we get them to shift their thinking?
And let me give you another example. Like, let's say that I started in a TPRM team in a company. And when I start, they say that, hey, we have these compliance frameworks and we have this checklist. We will do that only for the sake of completing this checklist. Your job is to make sure that you get answers about this checklist from the vendors. And we are enforced to monitor only the critical vendors, not all the vendors. So we have these 100 vendors. It's a one-man team that you are going to reach out to them, get the answers. So what am I managing then? Am I managing the risk? No, I am managing the checklists. I am managing the questionnaires. I am making sure that I get the answers. I never validate or control those things, if that control is really in place or not. I'm just creating some documentation. If something happens, I can send it to regulatory bodies. Hey, we have the assessment. That's the culture that we need to change. That's the biggest
the CYA culture.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
And
Which I cannot say what it is.
Well, so how about CYB? Cover your butt.
Yeah.
You okay with that one?
I'm okay with that one. So
Ferhat doesn't like to say bad words, so we try to make him say them.
But that's the problem, right? We need to really help industry to understand that, hey, you need to manage the risk because there's a real risk over there. I don't think, for instance, Target, they classified Fazio Electronics, the HVAC vendor, as a critical vendor, right? Maybe there is no assessment, right? I'm guessing there was no assessment back then. So that's not really managing the risk then. And the consequences are a lot. I'm not doing fear mongering. Those are real cases that we have seen. We still, observing those type of incidents. So there's a real risk that you need to protect your organization. That's the definition of the job. It's not just being compliant.
So everybody, it's human nature to focus on being self-serving. It just is. And, you talked about that telephone. The account exec may not pass something on because they don't want to lose an account or they don't want to do that. And, the problem with that, in that scenario, that culture has failed to teach everybody how that risk can affect the bottom line of the company, which will affect the bottom line of the individual. So when you are able to connect the risk to the bottom line that way, that's a culture change. It's not, if I don't make my quota this quarter, my bonus isn't going to be big enough, and or am I not going to promotion or whatever it is. That's a day-to-day world of somebody that's in sales. But when they understand that the risk failure can affect the company, which will affect everything that they're doing, that's the culture I see. That's how you change it.
He's right. That culture should not just reside in the TPRM teams. That should be in the entire company. Let me give you an example. Some of our customers, they share some of the findings with a very major cloud provider, but they have their account executives on the other side, and the account executives, they never share the findings with the security team. But one of them did. And that cloud provider, TPRM, head of TPRM, he was in one of these conferences. I think it was either Black Hat or RSA. I think it was RSA. And he said that, hey, we received some findings from your company. We want to have a chat. We want to discuss these findings. And we met with the security team, and we told them, hey, actually 5 of our customers shared these findings with you. And they said that, and with whom they shared. We showed the email addresses, like these are your employees that these findings were shared. And they said, we never got those things, and we don't know those people. But eventually they appreciate the findings and they start to work on it, because there are maybe more than 200 of our customers monitoring them. So they start to understand the value of it, and fixing those things, they're actually answering all these 200 customers, saying that, hey, we are remediating the problem.
And that helps us too. I had a similar situation. A friend of mine is a CISO for a very big tech company. There was some stuff in their report. They didn't understand it. So we actually got them on the phone with Jondan, our CTO and founder. And Jondan, number one, explained something about the platform that they didn't know, which they appreciated. Jondan also learned something very interesting about the data we were collecting and actually made some tweaks to the way we were scoring. That's why that collaboration is so important. Mm-hmm. And just to kind of sum up the culture thing, and you guys both alluded to it, and I'm a huge fan of this. we need to force people to think about situations from other people's perspectives. When I used to run workshops, especially incident response, I would always give people a different job. You're the CTO. No, not today. Today, you're the CFO. You're the CFO. No, today, you're the CIO. And it didn't always go the way we wanted, but we always heard at the end, we never thought about that before. That's a huge win. Everybody's so focused on the stuff right in front of them. We need to start getting people to understand, yes, you're right. Short term, maybe sales, you might be impacted, but long term, we can't manufacture product, and then you're going to have to give the money back anyway. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So let's sum up the 5 things. So we are going to move away from annual assessments as the primary source. Still have value, but we need to add context and move towards more continuous. Risk dashboards create blind spots that we need to push people past, understand, yes, it's a good starting point. Number 3, compliance and security are not the same thing. We all agree that is true, but we talked about some interesting ways to sort of change that mentality and work better with our auditors, with our compliance people, with our risk people. Number 4, set it and forget it from a programmatic perspective. We need to move away, but from an agentic perspective and a tactical perspective, set it and forget it is actually not a bad way to go, and I think can give us a lot of value. And then finally, culture, right? We've talked about it before. Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We need to shift the culture. And the only way to do that is to move away from the blame game, move away from siloed decision-making, create more consensus. And we've talked about that a bunch of times. So those are 5 tips that you should all be thinking about. Don't make the mistakes that plenty of people make.
At Black Kite, we believe cybersecurity doesn't thrive in the shadows. That's why we built the industry's first open, fully transparent third-party cyber risk platform, designed to replace complexity with clarity. Want to finally trust your vendor cyber risk data? Visit blackkite.com.
So now we come to the section of the show where we do a research roundup. We're going to be using a piece of data again from the Verizon DBIR, Data Breach Investigations Report. So here's the data point that we want to talk about. So I'm going to read it to you because I don't really understand it, and I'm going to have Ferhat explain it to me. Exploitation of vulnerabilities accounted for 20% of breaches, up 34% year over year, with edge devices and VPNs driving most of the surge. I recognize every word in there, but put them together, don't get it. Yeah. So maybe help us understand, Ferhat.
Sure. I mean, in the last year, especially, the exploiting vulnerabilities is the number 1 attack vector for ransomware groups, and some of the APT groups also, they were going there. It doesn't mean that, the social engineering attacks are not there. They are number 2 and they are close contestant. And we were seeing these a lot because when there's a vulnerability to exploit, now these groups, they have these mass exploitation methodologies that they can perform, they can execute, and they can...
And some of that's being enabled by AI, as we've talked about before, right?
What?
So some of these massive exploitations, it's being fueled and sped up by AI.
Not really. There are some open source codes out there. They pretend to be an AI tool, and and these employees, they download it, and because of that. But I think we have seen an AI generated malware recently from one ransomware group, but that's pretty new and it's not a good one. So they are searching some of the things, but they are not investing a lot because the old methodologies, it's working.
Right.
And they know, they discover these vulnerabilities and they go after them. If it is a vulnerability in the nature of remote code execution, they can, execute an attack from overseas very easily. And if it is a very popular product, then they can reach out to more people, like they can access to more networks. So that's why we start to see that. But this year, I think, and the end of this year, this might change. We start to see more social engineering attacks because now AI helps them to create more convincing emails that can go through the spam filters, so that, or they can create pretext, like calling this, support center and asking some credentials. So we start to see more and more social engineering attacks this year.
So you're saying that email I got this morning offering me that job, making a lot of money, is not real?
It is real. Go for it. Go for it.
Wait a minute, I got that same email.
But yeah, I mean that thing is changing now.
Do you see that as a harbinger of sort of the future? Do we think people are going to shift back toward more technical?
Harbinger of the future. You know my D&D name. How did you do that?
Well, Harbinger is also another Dungeon Crawler Carl character.
Yeah, it is. But now I want to get back to this. That edge devices and VPNs that it's increasing. So I've been in the industry a long time, and the edge used to be everything. Hard, crunchy exterior. That's how you protected your environment. And this was before the cloud. This was you had control, physical control. So that's where we focused. And bad actors learned that, well, maybe they're getting too good at that. So, then defense in depth became the mantra. And people still talk about defense in depth. Does this mean that we've lost focus on what we were good at 25 years ago, that edge, and they're taking advantage of that? Is that what that means? Help me out. Because I don't understand.
Because when you look into the core, the cloud providers or other, core network devices, they are getting better and better in some of the measurements. But the edge device...
So you mean sort of out of the box, they're more secure than they used to be? Okay.
Exactly. But the VPNs, especially the VPN credentials are there. There are so many stellar logs that people collect where they can find some of the credentials that they can get into the VPN servers or these edge devices. So it is easier to infiltrate the edge devices a little bit now, and that's why we have started to see these things.
I also think the risk mitigation that VPNs provide, I think, is very misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. And VPN is a private pathway, right?
Yeah.
You create your own road to connect someone, but if you give access to that road to some malicious actor, they will use it for sure.
And the data is encrypted, so now the monitoring can't see him.
Yeah.
So, all right, interesting. All right, so we'll have to see where that goes. And it's interesting, Ferhat, that you believe that we're going to shift back towards social engineering. Because as I mentioned, when I was a pen tester, I was a bad pen tester. But what I realized, I was a very good social engineer. And that was always the way I was able to get in. And, human nature, people want to be nice. They want to be helpful. And I think we're in a situation now. We have like a society filled with people who are very lonely. And I think social engineering is very dangerous for those people. And I think AI is going to make that stuff worse too.
Well, you can be a good social engineer because you know the culture, you know the language, right? The reason that these groups, they were avoiding social engineering a little bit is they didn't know the culture, they didn't know the language. There are so many tells in an email, you can say that it's okay, this is a fake email. But now with AI, they have the culture and language in their hands. Now they can create these convincing emails. And there are some groups, very organized crime groups, they speak English very well. So some of them got arrested in the UK, some of them in the US, but they are still out there. It is, I think, a biggest danger that we need to face.
So I want to answer your Harbinger question real quick now.
Oh, yes. Okay. Harbinger of doom.
This is, to me, this is very clear. And I've talked about this before, is that bad actors they're OODA loop. They're more agile. We can send me a link on connect on LinkedIn. I'll tell you more about it. But they are extremely agile. And when they find things are harder, they shift to what the easy one is. And we have to understand that mentality, and that's what we have to bake into our own strategy for the future.
Right. So bad guys, they're going to take the easiest pathway. Yeah. Who knew the bad guys were lazy just like everybody else?
Yeah, really. Yeah. What works,
Yep. Awesome. So again, love research, use it, make sure you contextualize it, and make sure it's applicable in your environment.
Want more conversations like this? Leave us a rating on Spotify. It helps other people who care about doing TPRM right find us.
So for our next segment, we're going to move over to Love It or Hate It, where I am going to read a couple of statements, and the three of us are going to vote and then talk about whether we love something, hate it, agree, don't agree, or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to reverse the order here. The first one is Goodhart's law ruins third-party risk management.
Come on, what is Goodhart's law?
What is Goodhart's law?
Goodhart, like
So I'm gonna paraphrase. Goodhart's law is basically the concept that when the target of the measurement becomes the objective, it is no longer an effective metric. So the point there, and we actually alluded to it before, which is if the goal of security is to be compliant, it is no longer an effective risk management approach. Okay, so now vote on it.
Okay, yep. All right. I mean, as far as I understand, yeah. I mean, when a metric becomes a target, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't use that metric, right? Compliance is a good example, but I'm thinking more general. So all the metrics that we put out there about risk is a target. They always criticized. That doesn't mean that they ruin the TPRM. We should still use them. We should still use some sort of a metric. Whatever the metric you come up with will be targeted for sure.
Well, I love it because, a metric is nothing more than you're putting a stake in the ground in the future. And if you're focused on the path to that stake in the ground, you miss things that change along the way. And you've given up your total agility because things are going to change. Things around that metric may change. The story that metric tells might change. The value might change. But you put that stake in the ground and you're driving to it, so you've forgotten everything else. So on that road, you're on a very narrow road and you're going to miss a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. My concern with this conceptually is that we're going to start moving away from risk management and we're going to continue to shift toward, well, I checked the box, right? And as an example, suppose your target's 4 for whatever, and you're at a 3.95 or 4.01. Are you really that much more secure? And the answer is probably not, especially considering some of these metrics are made up of sort of arbitrary elements. But I think we really need to shift people away from understanding why the compliance requirement was created in the first place and to kind of deal with that underlying risk. Unfortunately, sometimes, and this is all respect to auditors out there, sometimes the auditors are not really open to having those conversations. It says here, you need to do this, you need to do it. I'm not interested in your compensatory or mitigatory controls. So, okay. Second one, frameworks are not a strategy. This is the first one we've all agreed on. All right, there we go.
No disagreement.
What I will say is I think we can paraphrase this to make it accurate. Selecting a framework should be part of your strategy.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
But I think it's very much connected back to the Goodhart's law thing, which is that the checklist should not be the end game. It should be sort of a means to an end. And we all agree on this. Any other thoughts you guys want to share?
You say it's part of your strategy when you select a framework, but then because you've selected it, now you're committed to it and you never change from that framework. You've gone from strategic to tactical, and now you've gone back into that loss of agility. Is that framework good for you next year? And, in the past, yes, it was, because frameworks.
So I just want to go to clarify. So you're not saying people should change frameworks every year?
No.
Okay, good, because that scared me.
You should evaluate every year. Is it still valuable? Is it still producing the security results that you want? But now with AI, and you look around the AI frameworks, yes, if it's an AI framework, you're probably going to have to change every week because they're changing so rapidly and new ones are coming out. So that's...
My experience when I was doing a lot of CISO and CIO advisory and coaching was, if you don't have a framework, pick one. I don't care which one you pick. And then as the program grows and matures, you can bring other ones in and you can tweak them. But I think starting off with a custom framework never goes well because you don't know what you're customizing and you don't really understand your risk. All right. Finally, annual assessments are worse than nothing. Oh, another agreement.
I should have looked.
I mean, before, if you say that before we start this episode, maybe we might have different answers. But along the way, we talk about, the value of annual assessments. That's why I think.
I always tell people, you got nothing? Let's come up with something. understanding it's a waypoint. It's a way station. We were talking about targets before. And one of the things I always tell people, look, when you're creating a metric target, if you're patching your systems in 75 days and you tell me your target's 7, I'm going to tell you there's no way. Right? So you have to be reasonable about making adjustments. So you know what? You're at 75. Let's go to 45, see what that costs, see if we're good. And then we can kind of make these negotiations. And I think that's at the core of all good risk management. I know we agree. So any other thoughts of wisdom around this one?
I mean, nothing is a very strong word here. I think that's why we said that we disagree with that. Because annual assessments, of course, there's a value, but it's also create, blind spots along the way, right? That's why having an annual assessment only is bad, but nothing is worse.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So that's been today's Love It and Hate It. I loved it.
Yep. That was a good one.
Bob hated it. Oh, all right, Bob.
Got to be different.
We're just getting started. Future episodes are going to hit even harder. Real stories, real breaches, real talk. Subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. Remember, cybersecurity doesn't thrive in the shadows. It demands daylight. Until next time.